During a stormy night, their feelings nearly surface when Daniel gently reaches for Linda's hand. She doesn't resist, and though nothing more happens, the tension becomes undeniable. The situation reaches a climax when Emily goes into early labor and is rushed to the hospital. While waiting, Daniel and Linda finally share a brief, emotionally charged kiss, more about pain and recognition than romance. After the birth of baby Oliver, life resumes, but everything is changed. Guilt and silence replace the comfort that once grew between Linda and Daniel. Linda, recognizing the line they crossed, decides to leave early. Before leaving, she writes a note to Daniel, acknowledging the emotional affair and expressing regret. She returns to her quiet life alone, forever changed, not by a physical betrayal, but by a fleeting connection that blurred the lines between support and desire. Emily never learns the full truth, and the family moves forward unaware of the silent fracture. The story ends with Linda's reflection. Infidelity doesn't always look like betrayal. Sometimes it looks like two people standing too close for too long, sharing silence that says too much. I hadn't expected to live under the same roof as my daughter and her husband again, not at this stage of life. But when Emily called, her voice trembling with exhaustion, asking if I could come stay for a while, just until the baby came, I didn't hesitate. She was in her 3rd trimester, aching, hormonal, overwhelmed. Her husband, Daniel, was doing his best. But the house was suffering, and so was she. So I packed my things, left my quiet apartment 2 towns over, and moved into their guest room for what I thought would be a few weeks. The first thing I noticed was how silent their home had become. Not tense exactly, just heavy. Emily, once so bright and energetic, now spent most of her time either sleeping or complaining of pain. She barely moved from the couch. I cooked her favorite meals, fluffed her pillows, and did what mothers do. She smiled, grateful, but distant. Something about her was closed off, sealed in by the weight of pregnancy. Daniel, on the other hand, was everywhere at once. He darted between work calls, grocery trips, laundry, and doctor appointments, never stopping long enough to sit down. If Emily groaned in the night, he was up before I was. If something spilled, he had already mopped it. His effort was genuine, but so was his exhaustion. His eyes, framed by shadows and the beginnings of lines I hadn't noticed before, spoke more than he ever said aloud. I admired him, truthfully. He reminded me of a man I once thought I had. A partner willing to do the hard things, to show up even when no one asked. My ex-husband, Jake, had been the opposite. He'd always been too tired, too distracted, too absent. Watching Daniel made me feel a strange ache. Not envy exactly, but longing. One evening, Emily had gone to bed early, her body aching from the weight she carried. I was in the kitchen rinsing dishes when Daniel walked in, hair damp from the rain. He placed a bottle of prenatal vitamins on the counter. "Forgot these in the car," he said, exhaling. "Thanks," I replied. "She's lucky to have you." He looked at me then, a little startled. I don't know if she sees it that way anymore. I paused, unsure if I should pry. "She's just tired, Daniel. It's not easy carrying life inside you." He nodded, leaning against the counter. "I know, sometimes I feel like a ghost in my own home." His words struck deeper than I expected. I understood that feeling far too well. We didn't say much else that night, but something shifted. A small crack in the routine. The next morning, he had already made coffee when I woke up. 2 mugs sat out, one already poured for me. It became a quiet rhythm. He'd pour, I'd cook. He'd work, I'd clean. Slowly, between tasks and tired moments, we talked. About small things, then bigger ones. He asked about my marriage, And I told him the truth, that love had eroded into silence long before papers were signed. That being invisible can happen even in a crowded room. He listened, really listened, and that too caught me off guard. One afternoon, while folding laundry together, I dropped a towel. We both reached for it. Our hands touched, only for a second, a brush of skin. But I felt it. A pause, a breath. He didn't pull away, neither did I. I told myself it was nothing. Emily was growing more irritable, snipping at him for the smallest things, the wrong tea, the wrong brand of crackers, the wrong kind of silence. He never snapped back. He just nodded and tried again. I found myself siding with him, even when I shouldn't have. At night, I'd lay in bed and think about how odd it was to be more seen by my son-in-law in a few days than I had been in the last 5 years of my marriage. I reminded myself why I was there. For Emily, for the baby. I pushed away the flickers of guilt. But guilt has a strange way of creeping in through the cracks you pretend don't exist. Still, nothing had happened. Not really. But something was happening, quietly, slowly, and I wasn't sure how to stop it, or if I wanted to. The days began to blur, stitched together by soft routines and quiet moments. Emily's due date crept closer, but rather than drawing the three of us together, it seemed to stretch the space between us. She grew quieter, more withdrawn, as if conserving what little energy she had left. Her complaints shifted from physical discomfort to vague frustrations. Daniel breathing too loud, the house being too warm, the soup being too salty. Daniel absorbed it all without protest. He would nod, apologize, fix what he could, and then move on. But I noticed the way he sagged under the weight of it, the way his eyes darted to me sometimes, after an argument, seeking understanding, or maybe just refuge. It wasn't always spoken, but I understood. I had once been a young mother too, tired of being touched, needed, drained. Still, I found myself watching them both with growing unease. There was love, I believed, but it had dulled under the constant friction of late pregnancy. One evening, after another quiet dinner, Emily retired early without a word. Daniel and I lingered in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side. The silence between us was less awkward now, more companionable, until he spoke. I don't know how to help her anymore. His voice was low, cautious, as though afraid to say it too loud. You're doing more than most would, I said, handing him a wet plate. He dried it slowly. I don't think she even sees me anymore. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. Sometimes when you're in survival mode, you stop looking at anything but the next task. She used to touch my hand for no reason, he continued almost to himself. Used to kiss me in the middle of making breakfast. Now it's like I'm just part of the furniture. I should have redirected the conversation. I should have said something light, something harmless. But I didn't. Instead, I said, we stop reaching for people when we think they've already let go. Daniel looked at me then, the plate forgotten in his hands. There was something raw in his gaze. Hunger, maybe, but not for anything physical. It was for connection, for warmth, for proof that he wasn't alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling every beat of my heart. A line had been drawn, faint and breakable, and we had just stepped too close to it. The following days were filled with smaller, more frequent moments. A hand brushing mine while passing utensils, a shared laugh over an old movie, the way our eyes would meet across the room and linger just a second too long. I wore a sweater one morning that Daniel hadn't seen before. He said it brought out the color in my eyes. It was a simple compliment, but it warmed me more than it should have. I caught myself applying lip balm in the hallway mirror. Not for anyone, I told myself. Just habit. Then came the night of the storm. Rain battered the windows. Thunder cracked in the distance. Emily had taken a sedative earlier that evening, prescribed and safe, but it left her deeply asleep, unmoving under the heavy quilt. Daniel and I sat in the living room with mugs of tea, the glow of a lamp casting golden shadows. The wind howled outside, but inside it felt still. "I used to love storms," he said. "They made everything feel real. Now, they just remind me how unstable life is." I nodded, my hands cradling the mug. Storms strip things down, make you notice what's really standing. A long pause settled between us. He looked at me then, not with urgency, but something quieter. Need, maybe, or recognition. "You make the house feel calm," he said. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. The silence stretched. "I'm sorry," he added quickly. "That was out of line." "It's okay," I replied, voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to explain." Another silence, heavier now, charged. "I feel like I can breathe when I talk to you," he said. I closed my eyes, feeling the words settle in the space between us like dust. He reached over then, just lightly, resting his fingers against mine. This time I didn't pull away. A door hadn't opened, but something had cracked. Before either of us could say anything more, a sound broke the spell. A creak from upstairs. Emily shifting in bed. A reminder. Daniel pulled his hand back. I stood abruptly. "I should check on her," I said. He nodded, rising too. "Yeah, of course." I climbed the stairs slowly, every step echoing louder than the last. That night, sleep came harder than ever. Not because I had done something unforgivable, but because I knew how easy it had become to imagine it. The tension between us didn't disappear. It just settled into the background, like a song turned down low, but never quite silenced. We returned to our roles. Daniel, the attentive husband, me, the supportive mother, and Emily, quietly carrying the weight of something far greater than just a child. She had started to notice things, I think. The pauses in our conversation when she entered a room. The way we both smiled too quickly, or looked away too fast. But she never asked questions. Maybe she didn't want the answers. One morning, she pressed her hands to her swollen belly and said, "He moves more when you're around." "Who?" I asked. "The baby. He gets calmer when you talk." I smiled, feeling something twist. Inside. "Maybe he knows I'm his grandma." She laughed softly but didn't look at me. Just stared out the window, eyes distant. The storm from the previous week had passed, but its memory lingered. Not in the weather, but in the way we all moved. Cautious, quieter, as though we'd made it through something we didn't speak about, but still felt beneath the surface. Then it happened. The moment we'd been drifting toward, like leaves circling a drain. Emily went into labor 3 weeks early. It began in the middle of the night. Sharp cries from the bedroom, water on the sheets, a flurry of panic and towels. Daniel rushed her to the car while I packed a small bag, grabbed her documents, and climbed into the back seat without thinking. The key. Hospital smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The air was thick with nerves. I watched Daniel pace, run his hands through his hair, check his phone for no reason. Emily was in the delivery room, surrounded by nurses and machines, and we were left in the waiting area, alone. I didn't speak at first. Neither did he. We just sat side by side, quiet. both holding our breaths for different reasons. After a while, he looked over at me, eyes red-rimmed. "She's in pain," he whispered. "She's strong," I replied. "She'll be okay." His voice cracked. "I don't know if I will be." I turned toward him. "You will. You're doing everything right." "No, I'm not." His voice broke. "I'm losing her. I don't know when it started, but it's like we're not even in the same life anymore." I placed my hand over his, a gesture that should have been maternal, comforting, but it wasn't. Not entirely. He looked at me, the space between us shrinking with each shared breath. I should have stood up. I should have said something to ground us. Instead, he leaned in, and I let him. The kiss was brief, a whisper of something that should never have been spoken. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't even romantic. It was a desperate reaching out, a confession without words, a moment that belonged to no one. Then it ended. We both pulled back, breathless, not from the kiss, but from what it meant. A nurse entered the waiting room moments later. "She's asking for you," she said, looking at Daniel. He stood, dazed. "Right, yeah." He didn't look back as he walked down the corridor. I didn't follow. The baby was born at sunrise, a small, perfect boy with soft cries and tiny fists. I held him later that day, my hands trembling. Emily smiled weakly, her face pale but radiant. "We named him Oliver," she said. "He's beautiful," I whispered, my voice thick. She looked between Daniel and me as if trying to read something. "Thanks for being here, Mom. I don't think I could have done this without you." I kissed her forehead. Always. The next few days passed like a blur of feedings, hospital paperwork, and whispered lullabies. But something had broken in me, and I think it had broken in Daniel too. We barely spoke. Not because we didn't want to, but because we didn't know how to undo what had been done. When we returned home, I began packing quietly. My stay, as promised, had run its course. Emily was resting, the baby finally asleep. I folded each shirt slowly, deliberately. Daniel stood in the doorway as I zipped my suitcase. "You don't have to leave yet," he said. I smiled softly without turning. "I think I do." He stepped forward. "I didn't mean for that to happen." "I know," I said, "but it did." I left a note on the kitchen counter before I walked out. Just a few lines. Sometimes the lines between comfort and connection blur. Sometimes we reach for warmth and forget the burn. Thank you for reminding me I'm still capable of feeling something. But this was never ours to feel. And then I left. Back to my small apartment, the quiet hum of my refrigerator, and my own empty bed. The house I left behind was full of noise, of love, of new life. And yet, a part of me stayed there, tucked in the space between what should have happened and what did. Infidelity doesn't always look like betrayal. Sometimes it looks like two people standing too close for too long, sharing silence that says too much.